In the year 100 CE, on any given morning in the city of Rome, roughly 1 million people woke up in the dark. Not because it was early, because their rooms had no windows. They lived on the 4th, 5th, 6th floor of apartment blocks called insulae, timber-framed and plaster-skinned, packed so tightly along streets barely wide enough for a single cart that daylight never reached the lower levels. They swung their legs off straw mattresses, felt for the chamber pot in the corner, and began another day inside the most advanced civilization on Earth. And almost everything they were about to do, drink, eat, wash, walk, relieve themselves, carried a risk they could not see, could not smell, could not taste, and would not understand for another 18 centuries. This is not a story about how Rome was primitive. Rome was not primitive. Rome built aqueducts that delivered roughly 500,000 cubic meters of water daily to a single city, a volume London would not match until the Victorian era. Rome paved 80,000 kilometers of roads. Rome fed its urban poor for free for centuries through a grain distribution system of staggering logistical precision. The engineering was real. The ambition was real. What was also real was this: the same infrastructure that made Rome magnificent was quietly killing the people who lived inside it, and they had no way of knowing. You would not have known either. Start with the water. You have heard about Rome's aqueducts. 9 of them served the city by 97 CE, when a civil servant named Frontinus took charge of the system and wrote an entire book cataloging it with the pride of a man who believed he was managing the greatest public utility on earth. He compared the aqueducts favorably to the pyramids of Egypt, which he called idle, and to the famous works of the Greeks, which he called useless. His aqueducts were functional. They carried water from mountain springs, clean at the source, across miles of arched stone channels into the city. And then, the water entered lead pipes. The Latin word for lead is plumbum. It is the origin of the English word plumbing. This is not a coincidence. Rome's urban water distribution network relied extensively on lead fistulae, pipes stamped with the name of the property owner and the plumber who made them. Thousands of these pipe segments have been excavated. The water flowed through them into lead-lined cisterns, lead solder joints, lead storage tanks. And that was only the infrastructure. In the kitchen, something worse was happening on purpose. Roman cooks boiled grape must, unfermented grape juice, in lead-lined bronze vessels to produce a thick sweetener called defrutum, or sapa. The acidity of the juice leached lead acetate out of the metal and into the syrup. Lead acetate tastes sweet, genuinely, noticeably sweet. And Romans used the resulting syrup in wine, in sauces, in preserved fruit, in recipe after recipe. Columella published the technique. Pliny described it. This was not contamination. It was a recipe. Vitruvius, the architect, writing a generation before the birth of Christ, noticed that lead workers had pallid complexions and weakened bodies. He explicitly recommended earthenware pipes over lead ones. He saw the evidence with his own eyes and said so in print. Rome heard him and kept using lead pipes for another 4 centuries. Skeletal analysis of Roman era remains consistently shows elevated lead levels in bone. The symptoms of chronic lead exposure, abdominal cramping, cognitive decline, gout, kidney failure, infertility, map with uncomfortable precision onto conditions Roman physicians described regularly without understanding the cause. A 1983 study estimated that elite Romans may have consumed 250 micrograms of lead per day. The methodology was contested, the precise figure debated. The bones are not debated. The bones are in the ground. But perhaps you survived the water. Perhaps you were lucky or poor enough that you drank from the public fountains rather than a private lead connection. You still needed to use the toilet. Rome's public latrines were, by ancient standards, a marvel. Stone benches with keyhole-shaped openings arranged in rows over a channel of continuously running water. A dozen seats, sometimes more, side by side. No partitions. You sat next to strangers, conducted your business, and when you were done, you reached for a sponge mounted on a stick, a tersorium, dipped it in the channel of water at your feet or in a bucket of vinegar solution, and cleaned yourself. Then you put the sponge back. The next person used the same sponge, and the person after that. The tersorium was not a failure of the system. It was the system. These latrines were considered a civilizational achievement, and they were. The sponge was the standard issue technology for the standard issue function. Seneca mentions one in a letter. A Germanic prisoner of war shoved a tersorium down his own throat rather than face the arena. It is the only reason we know the object by name. What we know now, and Romans could not have known, is what lived on those sponges. Piers Mitchell, a parasitologist at Cambridge, published a study in 2017 analyzing latrine sediments and preserved fecal matter from Roman sites across the empire. Roundworm, whipworm, fish tapeworm. Intestinal parasites were endemic in Roman populations. And here is the finding that should stop you. Roman sanitation infrastructure did not reduce the parasite burden compared to pre-Roman populations. There is evidence it may have increased it. The system moved human waste efficiently. It did not sterilize it. It distributed it. The most sophisticated sanitation network in the ancient world was, by modern epidemiological standards, a transmission mechanism. If the toilet did not get you, the apartment might. Most Romans did not live in the elegant single-story domus you see reconstructed in museums. They lived in insulae, tenement blocks reaching 5, 6, 7 stories. Augustus imposed a height limit of roughly 70 Roman feet because the buildings kept falling down. Trajan later reduced it further. The upper floors were built cheaply, timber framed with rubble fill, a technique called opus craticium that Vitruvius himself criticized as structurally unsound and dangerously flammable. Juvenal described the sound of an insula settling at night, the cracks appearing in the walls, the grinding of timber under load. His friend Umbricius, in the third satire, explains that he is leaving Rome because he cannot sleep, cannot walk safely, cannot afford to live in a building that will not collapse on him. Cicero, in his private letters, mentions properties he owned that collapsed. His tone is not horror. It is mild financial irritation, a landlord noting a loss. The upper floors had no running water and no connection to the sewer system. Residents used chamber pots and either hauled them down the stairs or simply emptied them out the window. Roman law addressed this specifically. The Actio de Effusi Vel Diectis, preserved in the 12 Tables, Rome's earliest legal code, established liability for objects thrown or poured from buildings onto people below. The law existed because the practice was ancient, persistent, and dangerous enough to require formal remedy. Now imagine walking home through those streets at night. Rome had no streetlights, none. The wealthy traveled with enslaved attendants carrying torches, providing both light and physical protection. The vigiles, established by Augustus around 6 CE, numbered roughly 7,000 men, and they were primarily a fire brigade, not a police force. 7,000 men for a city of 1 million. The arithmetic speaks for itself. The Subura, Rome's densest residential district, was a canyon of 5-story buildings where daylight barely reached ground level even at noon. Martial called it loud, foul, and dangerous, And Martial was not a man who was easily shocked. Juvenal dedicated a substantial section of his third satire to the experience of walking Roman streets after dark. The drunks, the muggers, the contents of chamber pots arcing down from upper windows. If you were a solitary person of modest means, walking home from a tavern through the Subura after sundown, you were effectively on your own. The danger was real. How real is genuinely debated. Juvenal and Martial were satirists, and exaggeration was their profession. But the legal record corroborates the literary one. You do not write laws against things that do not happen. Suppose you made it home alive, unmugged, unsoaked. You were still hungry. If you were a citizen, a free adult male, you received a monthly grain allotment through the Annona, roughly 33 kilograms, enough to sustain one person. The grain was stored in enormous warehouses called Horea. The Horea Galbana complex alone covered 21,000 square meters. It fed hundreds of thousands, and it was infested with weevils, beetles, and rodents, because no ancient grain storage system could prevent that at scale. The grain was milled using volcanic stone. It was effective at grinding. It was also effective at introducing mineral grit into the flour. Fine stone particles that over years of daily bread consumption wore Roman teeth down to stumps. Skeletal studies of Roman-era remains show dental wear so severe that the pulp chambers were exposed, creating open pathways for abscess. In a world without antibiotics, a dental abscess did not stay in the mouth. It became sepsis. Free bread kept you alive. The flour ground your teeth until the infection started. What you could not cook at home. And most residents of upper-floor insulae could not cook at all, because open flame in a timber-framed building was one spark away from catastrophe. You bought from the thermopolia, the street food counters that lined Roman commercial streets. Roughly 150 have been identified at Pompeii alone. They served hot food, prepared in open-air kitchens, sold to anyone who could pay. There was no food inspector, no sanitation standard, no regulation of any kind governing preparation, storage, or sale. The sausage seller was answerable to no one. The garum, fermented fish sauce, Rome's universal condiment, produced by layering fish guts and whole sardines in salt and leaving them to rot in the sun for months, was probably safe when properly made, because the salt concentration killed pathogens. The word properly is doing a great deal of work in that sentence. Pliny himself complained about fraudulent garum and adulterated product. There was a great deal of money in cutting corners, and no institution existed to prevent it. If you ask how Romans dealt with the illnesses all of this produced, the answer is Roman medicine. And Roman medicine was, in its way, as impressive and as lethal as everything else. Surgical instruments recovered from Pompeii are genuinely sophisticated. Scalpels, forceps, bone probes, even a trephination drill for opening the skull. The tools would not look out of place in a 19th century surgical kit, but they were used without anesthesia beyond wine or opium, and without any concept of antisepsis. Celsus, Rome's most careful medical writer, described wound treatment in clinical detail. Vinegar washes, poultices of meal and wine. Pliny catalogued remedies involving animal dung. The surgeon had the instruments of a craftsman and the infection control of a butcher. For the ordinary Roman who could not afford a physician, the options were herbs, prayers to Asclepius, and amulets. The votive offerings found at healing temples across the empire, terracotta models of diseased eyes, swollen limbs, damaged organs, are the medical records of people who had nowhere else to go. And then there were the baths. Here is where Rome's self-image and Rome's biological reality diverge most sharply. The public baths were the jewel of Roman civic life. By the 4th century, Rome had over 800 smaller bathing establishments and 11 monumental thermae complexes. Every social class used them. They were heated, staffed, architecturally magnificent. Seneca, living above a bathhouse, described the soundscape. The grunting of men lifting weights, the slap of masseurs' hands on oiled flesh, the shrieks of customers having their body hair plucked, the belly flop splash of a diver hitting the pool, the cries of sausage vendors echoing off the vaulted ceilings. It was Rome's living room. Everyone came. The water was warm. It was shared by dozens of bathers at a time. It was changed infrequently. It was not treated with any chemical. Bathers entered with open wounds, skin infections, parasitic conditions. Celsus specifically warned against bathing with fresh injuries and acknowledged that people did it anyway. The tepidarium and caldarium maintained temperatures ideal for bacterial growth. Mitchell's parasitological analysis recovered parasite eggs from Roman bathhouse drain sediments. Roman oculists, eye doctors, were so common that their stamp molds for identifying medicated eye salves have been found across the empire. Indirect testimony to the prevalence of eye infections that shared bathwater spreads with particular efficiency. The most beloved public institution in Rome was a warm communal petri dish. The Romans who used it felt clean when they left. They were not. Behind all of this, invisible and unnamed, another killer worked the city. The Roman Campagna, the low, marshy terrain surrounding Rome, bred Anopheles mosquitoes carrying Plasmodium falciparum, the deadliest malaria parasite. Roman writers describe seasonal fevers without understanding the cause. But Varro, writing in 37 BCE, came breathtakingly close. He warned against building near swamps because they bred tiny creatures, animalia quaedam minuta, invisible to the eye, that floated through the air and entered the body through mouth and nose, causing serious disease. He was right. He was 2,000 years ahead of Pasteur, and nothing happened. No one followed up. The observation sat in an agricultural manual, accurate and ignored, while malaria killed Romans for another 15 centuries. The wealthy left the city in summer, retreating to hill towns where the air was better. The poor stayed. The poor always stayed. I want you to think about something for a moment, because we have been talking about systems and infrastructure and invisible risks, and it is possible to forget that the people living inside these systems were not statistics. They were people who counted days. Roman cemeteries contain thousands of small tombstones, simply carved, each one recording a child's life with a specificity that still stops you cold. Diem, Dismanibus, to the spirit gods. And then a name. And then, who lived 2 years, 3 months, 14 days. The parents counted the days. Everyone. Demographic modeling for the Roman Empire estimates that roughly 1 child in 3 did not survive to their first birthday. Approximately half of all children born may not have reached the age of 10. These numbers are derived from tombstone data, census fragments, and comparative demographic modeling. They are estimates, not counts. But the scholarly consensus on their general magnitude is firm. The causes were the accumulated weight of everything in this story. The water, the parasites, the food, the disease, the mosquitoes, the absence of any medical intervention that could address what was actually killing them. A Roman family did not hold a naming ceremony for a newborn until the dies lustricus, 8 or 9 days after birth. Roman law did not count the child as fully a person until that day. This was not cruelty. It was preparation. You do not attach a name to what you expect to lose. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer, one of the engineering achievements that textbooks still celebrate, emptied directly into the Tiber. So did the runoff from tanneries, butcheries, dyeworks, and fullers who processed cloth with human urine. And downstream, in the poorer districts where aqueduct access was limited, people filled clay jars from the same river. Pliny the Elder reported that some Romans considered the Tiber's water wholesome. They drank it and could not see what was in it, because what was in it was invisible. And the idea that invisible things could kill you had been written down once, in a farming manual, by a man named Varro, and then forgotten. Rome built the ancient world's most extraordinary infrastructure: aqueducts, sewers, roads, baths, grain distribution, public latrines, surgical instruments, legal codes. Every one of these systems represented a genuine civilizational leap. And every one of them, in the absence of a single concept, that disease is caused by organisms too small to see, carried lethal consequences that the people who built them and used them and maintained them could not detect. This is not a story about Roman failure. It is a story about the specific shape of knowledge before the modern world. Romans could engineer stone to carry water across a valley. They could not engineer the water itself to be safe. They could build a public latrine that served a dozen citizens in shared civic dignity. They could not see what lived on the sponge. They had a man who looked at a swamp and intuited the existence of microscopic pathogens in 37 BCE. They did not have a culture that could make the leap from observation to theory to action. The next time you turn on a faucet and the water runs clear, you are standing on the other side of that leap. The pipe is still there. The engineering is still Roman. What changed is what you cannot see, and the hard-won, centuries-late knowledge that what you cannot see is what kills you. If this is how you learn, through the specific, the documented, the things that actually happen to actual people, then there is more to come. Rome ran for 1,000 years, and almost none of it looked the way you were taught. Stay for the next one.